Well, good evening, everybody. I don't know how I got referred to this society. Seemed a long time ago. No, but no, I have no idea. But well, I hope you enjoy it. It's a topic that my wife and I have been studying now for over 35 years. This is one element to it. My passion is those individuals who served as volunteers during the First World War, both with the British Expeditionary Force, but also with the French Army. I've chosen tonight's talk. I have no idea what happened to the S. It's experiences, and the S is shot up there. I don't know what, but it's the life experiences of voluntary aid detachment women ambulance drivers, 1916, not 1914, 1916, 1919. It doesn't cover the first aid nurse and yeomanry, the Fannies. It doesn't cover the Scottish Women's Hospital. That's another subject. It doesn't cover the Hackett Lowther unit, all women's units that served during the World War. It's just the bads tonight. Where's my clicker? So at the outbreak of war, August 1914, you well know, there were those individuals that couldn't join the colours. They couldn't head for the front with the British Expeditionary Force, those who were too young, those who were too old, those who were medically incapacitated, those for conscience reasons, religious reasons. And of course, this time, the women were to take no part in the war as far as the War Office and the British military authorities were concerned, and certainly not at the front. There were a few, but mostly women were not welcomed in the war at this particular time. But as the casualties started to rise, we'll see this gave an opportunity for women to head for the front and experience the war. And that's pretty much what this talk is about, how women experienced their Edwardian existence and then the war existence. Many of you will know this lady, Dr. Elsie Ingalls. She was a famous Scottish surgeon in her day. She had assumed the Scottish Red Cross could help fund a medical unit led by her for the front. But the head of the Scottish Red Cross, the physician George Beeston, a pioneer in oncology and a leading expert in the development for breast cancer, he spoke to Dr. Elsie Ingalls and said that the War Office will have nothing to say to you. And so she headed for the War Office in London, offering her services and her women colleagues, as she was a qualified surgeon. And again, she had a response, "My good lady, go home and sit still." She didn't, and that's another story. She formed the Scottish Women's Hospital, a really interesting period of history during the World War I. Well, as the masters and the menfolk headed for the front, their private vehicles were left behind, available to be driven by the wives and the daughters for the use, voluntary use as well. And also, as the ranks of the British Red Cross Society, the chauffeurs and the Army Service Corps drivers headed off to the war, private car owners and business owners became frustrated by the lack of drivers. And so women, with all the Edwardian prejudices of the period, not only proved that they could do men's work, we will see, they found that in some cases they had to and did it extremely well. By the time war ended, there was not a male masculine preserve that women had not experienced. This story looks at the one aspect of their experiences which I find fascinating. That's driving motor ambulance at the front or on the lines of communication, bringing the wounded in from the ambulance trains to the hospitals. Before I move on, what was a VAD? What is a VAD? You may well know, but we'll just have a think about it. Some of you may not know what a VAD was. Following the experiences and the lessons learnt from the Second Boer War, the War Office identified that to utilise the experiences of medical volunteers in an effective and managed way during any subsequent war, rather than the previous ad hoc way that any individual could put on a Red Cross nurse's uniform or a brassard and head for the front without any authority at all. A system needed to be established, and late Norman Gooding, a friend of Susan mine, who detailed in the register the British Red Cross volunteers overseas, we'll have a look at that on the next slide. A system should be established where the efforts of useful qualified volunteers could be harnessed and directed appropriately. Most of you will know that the Haldane reforms, this is the Secretary of State, Richard Haldane, a series of far-ranging reforms to the British Army was made between 1906 and 1912. Within these reforms, a scheme of organised voluntary aid in England and Wales, which set up both male and female voluntary aid detachments to fill certain gaps in the medical provisions on the home front, not on the war front, on the home front, in the event of war, to support the territorial medical services. And a similar scheme in Scotland followed in December of that year. As the war progressed, as you will know, in 1914-15, the restrictions of the voluntary aid detachments were lifted and service abroad was authorised. The authorisation and the vetting of the VADs was taken up by the British Red Cross Society and the Order of St John of Jerusalem, the Joint War Committee, but I should think many of you will know that. And also, as the war progressed, the General Service VAD was established, and this what provided. This is my Bible. I don't know if you're researching. This is my Bible for the VADs and British Red Cross volunteers during the First World War. This is a godsend for me. In this book, it gives you all the jobs or roles that the VADs had: assistant cook, assistant waitress, clerk, commandant, motor driver, which we'll cover in this talk, dispenser, head cook, head waitress, laundry maid, housemaid, head housemaid, kitchen maid, laboratory assistants, quartermaster, scullery maid, shorthand typist, storekeeper, superintendent, typist, telephonist, waitress, war maid, and X-ray attendant. For me, as a medal collector, when I find a group of medals to a VAD, it will just have the name and VAD. It will give you no idea what role that individual played. As soon as you go to this register, it will tell you what role they played in their voluntary aid detachment role. Right, before we move on, a couple of things, and again, you may well know this, but there are some crucial developments during the war for the history of women that should really be considered. On the 25th of May 1915, the coalition government was found. You'll well know that. The wartime coalition government was formed by Asquith. The change of government resulted from the attacks by Asquith, or on Asquith's administration, particularly on Winston Churchill and the aftermath of the Gallipoli Peninsula, on the Dardanelles. A complete failure, and this led directly to the failure of the British offences on the British Nivelle offensive, the Shell scandal. And so a coalition government was formed. David Lloyd George, the Minister of Munitions, encouraged women into the munitions factories to cover the Shell scandal in its day. Conscription, the military service bill was presented to Parliament in January 1915, became 16 and became law in March 16. It was not a well-produced document and hastily constructed, but the bill called up all single men and childless widows between 18 and 41, starting with those who had attested under the Derby scheme their willingness to serve. And then, in May 1916, the introduction of universal military conscription. All men between 18 and 41, whether they were married or unmarried, were likely to be called up. And in 1918, during the latter months of the war, the Military Service Act, the Military Service Act number 2 was passed and extended the military age up to 51 years of age. This had a significant impact on women now being needed on the home front, and as we'll see on the front in France and Belgium. I just want to cover the medals of the period because there's some medals on the table, and some of the research you may do, they were entitled to medals. So I just want to have a reflection before we move on to their actual work. This is the 1914 Star, colloquially known as the Mons Star, because most of the individuals that were awarded this medal fought at the Battle of Mons, the first battle of the First World War. It was authorised in 1917. For those who served between 5th of August and the 22nd, 23rd of November 1914. It was also granted to those British Red Cross personnel between these dates, and also, but no, not the VADs, not the chauffeurs. No chauffeurs were awarded this medal. I'll tell you why in a bit. And so the Star was awarded to over 2,000 British Red Cross and Order of St John personnel, and just 20 VADs were entitled to this medal. 1914-15 Star. This was authorised in December 1918. It was awarded to officers and men and women of the British Imperial Service who served against the Central European powers in the theatre of war between the 5th of August and the 31st of December. And it was not, this was a medal that was entitled in any theatre of war, not just France and Belgium. And some 7,000 of these medals were awarded to the British Red Cross and Order of St. John, and about 800 VADs were awarded this medal. And the medals I've shown tonight here are the medals awarded to the main individual in this talk, the British War Medal and the Victory Medal. The British War Medal was a silver or bronze awarded to officers and men of the British Imperial Forces who either entered the theatre of war or entered a service overseas between the 5th of August 1914 and the 11th of November 1918 inclusive. And that was extended to Russia, Siberia and other areas. So if a nurse came from Australia and served in a hospital in the UK, she was entitled to the medal. If a nurse worked in a hospital in this country, she wouldn't be entitled to the medal because she hadn't entered a theatre of war and she hadn't entered service overseas, an anomaly. And the Victory Medal below, again, it was not restricted, but not everybody received this medal. And normally you find them in pairs with the service number on the rim, with the name and the regimental corps that they served in. Right, the story tonight. I was very fortunate recently, or not too recently, to buy this, and do have a look at it after. It's a fantastic document. It's a large collection of photographs to this lady, Ruth Yeoman. It provides a significant element to this talk. It's a personal insight into her life at service in the war and others. I've also used a war experience as a VAD, and we'll look at her, Joseph Tennant, a military medal winner. She wonderfully describes in her book, The Red Herrings, her life and experiences during the war, and we'll have a look at this in a bit. And I've also used the experiences of VAD Alice Remington, who describes in her book, Women at War, which was produced by the Imperial War Museum. And all the photographs that you'll see, ladies and gentlemen, tonight, from my own personal collection, I've collected over some 30-odd years. Well, this is Ruth. Here she is with her medals. Have a look at them on the table. And here's a driver. I've never seen a driving license before. It was produced by the Royal Automobile Club. You'll see that it's got her name and address. She has passed the exams by the Royal Automobile Club, and she's qualified to drive petrol cars. I'd never seen one of these before. For me, and some of you may well utilise the website, the British Red Cross website is absolutely fantastic. The personnel cards for each individual who served as a VAD or a British Red Cross Order of St. John individual. It's a fantastic wealth of knowledge, information. It has the name, the address, their age, the date of service, the role, chauffeurs here, pay, with pay. It's got Joint War Committee of the VAD. So it's telling me that she's a Joint War Committee. So it's the Joint War Committee of the British Red Cross Order of St. John, and she's a VAD. And overleaf, it gives you where the individual has served. So it goes from the Suffolk County offices, and then it tells me that she's driver in France, in Tarbes, the Paris convoy, and the Boulogne convoy. So it's a fantastic document for me to identify where these individuals worked. The VADs had to pay their own training and did not receive a salary until about 1915, when the War Office began to pay them £20 annually. As a result, the VADs typically came from the middle and upper class. They could afford training fees and had enough time and money to work for little or no income at all. Joseph Tennant, who we'll see, states that she used to receive 21 francs and 3.5 francs were deducted for meals when they were out driving their ambulances, or also for washing purposes. The motor drivers, who we'll see, had to have good knowledge of driving, running repairs. They had to have a second-class RAC certificate. Allowances, £10 a week additionally was paid to the drivers when they were out on duty. And they had to have a test at the Devonshire House, which was the headquarters of the British Red Cross in London. The documents contained in here, it provides a wonderful insight into the experiences of these ladies. And this was a letter that was sent to Ruth, and it says, "Dear Madam, your report has been before the selection board, and I'm glad to say that your name remains on our list of selected members as a motor driver. Please be ready to serve whenever you're required and as soon as you may be called upon to rejoin. We fear an increased need of VAD members in the near future and are anxious to depend upon the help of those who have experience. It's absolutely necessary that we should be informed of all changes of address, and if for any reason your services are no longer available, do not forget to let us know. You will be glad to hear that we get better and better accounts of all the work done by the VAD members in all directions, and we must keep up our records of unselfishness. Yours sincerely, Catherine Fuse, Commandant-in-Chief." Catherine Fuse had gone out in October 14 with 16 VADs and 2 trained nurses and set up a rest station at Bologna with a dispensary, kitchen, stores and quarters, and within 24 hours had fed 1,000 wounded soldiers. She returned after 3 months and became the head of the VAD department in London at the British Red Cross House, Devonshire House. These are the instructions that she received. Members must report to the Transport Department at Pall Mall for their brassard, which is the armband, identity certificate, passport and ticket. Members should be at Charing Cross Station at 11:20 on whatever date and will meet a representative of the Transport Department where luggage is weighed and will there be given their tickets by the representative. A Red Cross official will assist members regard to passport at the port of embarkation. This is interesting. When the boat approaches, members should go to the smoking room. Why would you go to the smoking room? On the nearest side of the quay for examination of passports in order that they may get off the boat as quickly as possible. Members proceeding to Boulogne will be met by the Principal Commandant or her representative. If by any chance the members should miss her, they should report to the Hotel Crystal at the British Red Cross headquarters. And this was the building. This is the building as it is or was as the British Red Cross headquarters in Bologna. It was destroyed in the Second World War. So this is the building that most of them would have arrived at before being told where they were to be heading at what depot. Miss Alice Remington, who recorded her experiences at the Imperial War Museum, this is not her, but it's a representation of her, was bored with her mundane life at home and recalled that when war broke out, her moment had arrived. "This was my big chance of getting out and away. I wasn't attracted to nursing, and so the next best thing I could do was to learn how to drive and how to do simple mechanics. Having completed her driving course, Alice resolved to go to France. My father was secretly rather proud. He had no sons to send. The boy was only a nipper. My mother was horrified. She thought that, well, like all Victorian ladies, she had never mentioned the facts of life to any of us. And because of what she thought we should get into trouble, we just soon as learned. She passed the driving course. She became a VAD member. And this is what she wrote about the interesting class clashes of their time. The VAD drivers were drawn in from the same social class. The mechanics at the garage were not. But how does one put it? The working class were what? They went into the Women's Auxiliary Corps. Clearly, I think it was because they hadn't any money to learn how to drive. And at that time, their class did not have cars to do things in cars. And so most of them went into the WACs. 1916, this was the first VAD ambulance convoy established at Etretat. The volunteers had to be 23 years over and with 3 months experience. And this is the first convoy that was set. They serviced, this is the French coast. They serviced the injured, and we'll see a bit later in a few more slides. They serviced the wounded coming into the Havre. There. It's interesting to note the British Red Cross Order of St. John history states that men at the British Red Cross hospital base at Le Havre, women were not allowed to work there because suitable accommodation wasn't available. This is them at the train station at Etretat. The wounded would be brought in on the railway line behind this building. It's still there. They would wait. Obviously, the wounded would be brought in, and they would travel to the nearest hospitals in Le Havre with the wounded. So successful was that ambulance convoy that others were established. At Etaples, Le Tréport, Saint-Omer, Wimereux, Boulogne. And this is them at Le Tréport. Le Tréport was established by the men of the Army Service Corps, and now it was taken over by the ladies. And here they are. This is the men, and you can see on the grassed area the Army Service Corps badge. And when the ladies took over it, it became the Joint War Committee badge of the Order of St. John and British Red Cross Committee. Alice Remington said, "My parents were a little bit horrified that I would meet the rough and rude men in the garage. They look a little bit scary, don't they?" Quite true, I did, but I didn't tell them very much. So the men of the British Red Cross provided the mechanics for the vehicles until the ladies became very, very proficient themselves in mechanics of the vehicles and tending to them on a daily basis. This is the hospital at Tréport. It was a substantial hospital, British hospital, right on the top of the hill. I don't know if any of you have been to the cemetery there. It was bleak. And in Boulogne, the British Red Cross and Order of St. John had their headquarters, and this is the garage there. The ladies would have been familiar with these buildings. The workshops, blacksmiths, forges. At the end of the war, some 20,000 vehicles were serviced by this garage. Well, the instructions to the VADs is amusing. Uniform should be worn smartly and in a uniform way and not suit the taste of each individual. Scrupulous care should be taken to keep it clean, unrumpled. No additions or alterations such as furs, veils, bow ties or shirt collars worn. Overcoats are permissible. All powder, paint, scent, earrings or jewellery, etc. should be avoided, as using such things invites criticism and may bring discredit to the organisation. Women VAD members are not allowed to smoke except in their own quarters when off duty. Those VAD members posted to formations or units in which smoking is totally forbidden must keep the rule. Make up your mind to avoid any behaviour which might bring discredit upon you or your organisation which you represent. Without this necessary discretion, however talented or zealous you may prove, you can be no use to the VADs. And this one, treat men with whom you may be working with courtesy, but avoid intimacy. Newspaper article of the day. I happen to have the original of this photograph. A cheery group of British Western Front in France, happy in their work and in the consciousness that they are doing their bit. These lady ambulance drivers and other cherry workers in the VAD are characteristic of the spirit in which women are helping in the war on the Western Front. I think it's a wonderful picture. These obviously are uniforms, which we'll look at shortly, and these will be non-uniform items which they're providing themselves to prevent their uniform getting dirty.